हेलो। हेलो। أنا أتكلم كلاسيك.
Hi, hello. We'll wait. I hope everyone is having a great day. I guess we'll start when everyone gets here. I believe we're still missing half of the participants. Please tell me, Ssl, when we can start.
We can start.
We can start?
Okay.
Okay. All right. Can everyone see my screen correctly?
It's okay.
All right. Then let's get started. All right. Let's start. All right, we'll be doing a second part of forms and validations today as a continuation of what we started yesterday. I'd like to start by taking a few minutes to answer potential question by students who maybe couldn't follow the lesson yesterday. I know some of you had issues with the internet. I hope you could catch up using the recording. So I'd like to take maybe a couple of minutes to take questions from you if you have any. Please leave a message in the chat if you have any questions, otherwise we can just move on. All right, there doesn't seem to be any questions, so let's continue with today's lesson. So about the lesson plan, I'll start by showing you quickly the layout of what we'll be talking about today. We'll start with the input, talking about input types and by default HTML form validation as a continuation of what we started yesterday. We'll start from the code we wrote yesterday and we'll add validation to it through HTML. Then we'll see a more customized way of handling validation through JavaScript. We'll take a 10-minute break after that, so you can freshen up and rest a bit, and then we'll go into DOM manipulation, where we'll be having a bit of fun playing with the DOM. We'll end the session with questions and answers about the whole of today's lesson, and we'll talk about the assignment you guys will work on hopefully next week. For next week. So let's get started. Input types and HTML form validation. So yesterday we've written some inputs, mainly text inputs, but I believe that you saw more than that with Mr. Safari, but I'd like anyway to review these before we go on. So in our forms, we'll be having different types of inputs that will help us, in a sense, access validation when it comes to our HTML. And we'll be requiring this as part of our CRUD operations, especially when it's time to create something new and send it to our server and add it to a database. So we've already seen the text type of input, which will be a free text format. Mainly, we can be able to validate it through limiting its minimal and maximal length. We also have the password type, which is exactly the same as the text, but what you will be writing will be hidden and displayed as symbols, so that if anyone sitting next to us is looking at our screen, they will not be able to see what you're writing in the password, basically. In terms of other input types, we have the radio buttons, or radio buttons, which will be a type of input where we have pre-configured options to choose from. A good example of this is when we have to choose our gender, let's say in a sign-up page. where it will ask for male or female. We'd have to display that choice in terms of radio inputs. Checkboxes are virtually the same, but allows us to choose multiple values instead of just one. We can also use the file input to upload files to our website. For example, if we need to put in a profile picture. An interesting input is also the hidden input, since it's basically a text input that we can't see. So we can set from the HTML. It's really interesting because in this case, we will be able to set it only from JavaScript and then access it in the form. This is particularly useful when you want to say, let's say you want to have the age of a person in your form, but what you want to display an input with their birth date only. So you can have a hidden input for the age, which is then calculated and injected from JavaScript, depending on which birthday they chose. Then we'll have, of course, we can have an input as a button, which would be displayed as a regular button tag. We can have it in terms of reset button, so to empty our form. And as we used yesterday, submit input, which will basically trigger the form submission. And depending on what we chose in terms of actions and methods, that will pursue that will continue the process in the appropriate manner. So how can we validate those inputs? We have access to a number of attributes we can add to HTML that will already go a long way validating our forms. It will give us by default a good spectrum of possibilities in terms of validating the inputs we're putting in place. And most commonly used attributes of validation will be the required one. We'll see that a lot, which basically means that the form can't be submitted if there is an empty value with that input. Min length and max length are also very important validation attributes, since they're mostly used in passwords. You'll notice sometimes in websites when you're writing your password, it requires a minimal length of 8 characters. So we'd be using that to enforce that rule and not allow the form to be submitted unless the password is at the specifically mentioned minimum length. The same can be said with min-max, but that only applies to numbers. Basically, for a good example of that can be a continuation of what we just said about the hidden input with the age. We could have a date selection where we choose our birthday. We'd have a hidden input which will calculate and input the age. And then we can limit that age with a minimum of 18, for example, if our solution is only used by people above 18 of age. You can also use, we discussed input types. The type itself can act as a form of validation, for example, with certain types like email, for example, which will enforce an email format on the input's value. There are also others like phone and other input types that enforce, in a sense, their own validation without requiring extra effort from us. Pattern is also a good one, while being the most complex to use. It allows for the most freedom, since we'd be given it a regular expression and validate a pattern within the input's value. That's really interesting because you can do a lot with regular expressions while they're not easy to manipulate. You can, for example, enforce something like if you want something to be, let's say you're enforcing a serial number format and you want a specific sequence of number, letter, that you do it with the pattern attribute. That's about it for the theory. I'd like us to go directly into code and basically try to, one, enrich the form that we've written yesterday and add basically HTML validation to it, like we just discussed. So let's do just that. Let's go into code Sandbox, and we'll start basically from what we started doing yesterday. I'll be forking this Sandbox. You remember this form that we worked on yesterday with the first name and the last name? Well, our issue here is that basically I can have an empty first name and last name, and it will still work. I can have my first name as 12 and it will still work. So it lacks validation. So what we'll do is first get rid of unused code. We don't need this time sender that we worked on yesterday. We can get rid of that, leave only the form. We don't need the script for now. So we can get rid of that. Delete this file. Let's just keep this data HTML and data.js for parsing forms that we worked on yesterday, so we can see the results of what we're sending basically. So let's start. Let's make it more purposeful, and let's just call it HTML4s. Let's make this a sign-up form for our website. Let's say we're building a new website and we want to sign up new users. Let's prepare a form for that. Let's get rid of this, and we'll have just a full name here. Full name, let's keep it a text. And there. Let's now validate this, since I add an extra space. We have the submit. So as you can see now, I can submit it as empty and it works. What I want to do is, first of all, I want to make it required. So let's add the required attribute to it so that I can't submit it without putting a value anymore. It asks me to fill out this field. Now, another problem I see with this input is that I could have a full name the size of a paragraph. Technically, I could have a very, very long name. Let's just try that. I'll be writing a lot of characters, and see, I can have an extremely long name, which doesn't make sense and could basically fill our database with unnecessarily long data. So let's try to limit that and add here another attribute, max length attribute that we saw earlier, and give it a maximum length of 25. So if I try to do the same thing that I did earlier, it will, I didn't choose. So let's take the long approach. What you'll see is that it doesn't let me write past a certain point. It will stop me from going further. Let's put it a bit shorter so you can see what I mean. If I put it at max length 5, what you'll notice is that if I come here and try to write my full name, it won't let me write at some point. This, well, no matter what I type on the keyboard, it just won't let me type more. So it literally blocks me from writing more instead of just giving me the error in this case, which is really interesting because compared to other validations, it will actually let me do it, but display an error message. So let us put this back at 25 because I'd like to be able to write my full name, and jump on to the next input that we want for our form. Let's add an email because that's what our users will use to sign in later on. So let's put in email. This is our email, and we'll use the type email here to have that extra layer of validation, and we'll leave the required on, but get rid of max length. So now this email type should validate the format of this input, making it so, can you zoom on the code? Yes, of course, I'm sorry. I'll do that just right now. All right, maybe that's a bit better. Is that better for you? All right. Okay, that's better. Let's continue. So here like I said, we've added the email input using the email type. So that should technically validate that input and not let us write something that is not an email. Here. So let's try. You'll see that just by putting the type email, another thing that's interesting, that it'll give me basically suggestions on emails depending on emails I used on this browser. So the browser recognizes other email input types that were used in other websites and suggests I use these same values here. Let's choose my email and have my name here. And this should work. But if I go back and let's say I write something that is not an email here, well, it tells me that to include the @ symbol, so it knows it's an email. Well, that's about the email. When signing up, we'll also need a password. So let's do that. Let's create another input here for us. This will be a password. Let's change it to password. And we'll keep the type at password because we want it to be hidden. We don't want someone to be able to read our passwords. And we'll leave it as required, but we'll also add another attribute, which is the minimum length, because we want it to be, we don't want it to be shorter than 8 characters for our password to be secure. So let's try again. You'll see that now with the full name and email, it actually gives me full suggestions, and it autofills the rest, which is really a cool thing with forms and how browsers handle the forms. We can rely, to answer your question, Mahmoud, yes, we can rely on form attributes for validation on the most part. But as you'll see later on in the course, we may need to expand that with custom validators using JavaScript. And we'll get to that just after this section of the lesson. So you can see how we can use JavaScript to basically expand this behavior and have really good validation thanks to JavaScript. So yes, for basic validation, you can definitely rely on form attributes, but I don't think it will be enough in many cases. So let's continue with this. So the passwords, we've written it, so let's try it out. Surely it will ask us to fill it because it's a required field, but if I just write less than 8 characters, it will tell me to please lengthen this text to 8 or more. So it will need to reach 8 so that when I submit, it actually works, and it asks me to save the password because the browser actually understands that it's a sign-up form because it's finding an email and the password. So as you can see here, it's working fine, and it's validating regarding the attributes you were using. We'll now want to add more information to our user during sign up, and we'll add another attribute here that will be our phone number. And here we might use, what we want to use is depending on, we'll use the text input, and depending on the country you reside in, the pattern for phones might be different. I'll be using the phone number format that we use here in my own country, which is Tunisia, because I know the format. Here we use 8 numbers in our phones, the 2 first numbers being an identifier for the phone carrier, and the 6 following numbers referencing us as a client of that phone carrier. So what we'll be using here, we're leaving it at text, because we'll want to use the pattern attribute, where we'll use a simple regular expression to showcase what I've just said. So basically we have 8, we only allow numbers. So how we can write that in terms of regular expression, we can write it like this with 0 to 9 between brackets. A different example would be if you wanted to be a letters, for example, we'd be writing it like this from A to Z, but here we want it to be numbers. So we'd be going from 0 to 9, and we want it to be 8 of those, no more and no less. So let's try this out. We'll not have it as required though. So we can not submit it. So you'll see it automatically fills my phone when I've written my name, but I'll be deleting one of the numbers and try to submit. Oh, we forgot that the password is required, so we'll have to rewrite the password. And then you'll see here that it tells me to please match the requested format, because it's not valid according to the pattern attribute we've gave it. So let's add a 2 here. And now it is valid, and well, it goes to the next page. Another input that we'll be using here will be the radio. We want to know if our users are men or women, or simply for maybe for statistics purposes later on, depending on our on what our website does. So we'll have another input in our form, which will be the gender, and we'll use the radio type, which is interesting, but the radio type that we don't write in the same way as the others, because we have pre-configured options. So we actually have a generic label here for gender, but we'll have different inputs for every option actually. So what we'll have is basically this will be adding another label, and we'll say this is for gender male. We'll get rid of this return here, and we'll say here that it references males. And here we'll have a radio with the name gender, and we'll give it the ID gender male. But most importantly, we'll have to give it a value. What value we want to get when this is chosen. So here we'll simply choose male. This is the value of this option. And what we'll do is that we'll do this exactly the same again for females. So here we have a second input with, we can add required here and here as well, if you want them to always choose their gender. And here an important part of this that you'll need to see is that the name is the same. That's how actually it knows it's a single pair in our form. It's a single key value pair in our form because it shares the same name here. So it's the same key. So they both reference the same key and interchange their values that we've used here depending on which we choose. This doesn't require much validation apart from required because you are actually the one who's writing the values, not the user. So you can't have bad surprises here. You are the one who wrote the values after all. So apart from requiring that the user makes a choice, there isn't much to validate in radio inputs apart from basically this. So let's try this out. We see that we now have a gender selection, and let's do what we did earlier and not, oh, this is not long enough. We'll have to choose, it says, please select one of these options. So we'll say I'm a male and submit, and now you'll see that I'm getting the correct data in my form. And it says basically that my gender is male. That's how radio buttons work, even though I believe you most likely saw that with Mr. Safedi. Another input type that I'd like for us to see is the number input type. So we'll be adding that. Let's take it from here. And let's add another input that will say, let's say we're making a website for professionals, a LinkedIn of sorts. So let's say we add here years of experience with, let's say it's the years of professional experience. And we'll call this input experience. And we'll use the type number, which will already validate that we can't use text. It won't allow us to use text. So if I try to type text here, it shouldn't let me actually. Oh, let's see, to write it all. But it only needs numbers. And the interesting thing with this is that we can actually add a default value where we wanted to start. We wanted to start at 0, for example. Or let's say we wanted to start at 3. And let's say the minimum value we want is 3 years. Let's say we don't accept people with less than 3 years of experience. And the maximum would be, let's say 10 years. We don't accept people with more than 10 years of experience. So now you'll see that 3 is put in by default. So we don't need to use required here because basically we get a default value. Let's try again. And if I try to go below, you'll see that it won't let me get below 3. And if I go up, it won't let me go beyond 10. And if I write more, it should stop me and say values must be less or equal to 10. Okay. Let's say we have a couple of questions. So let's address Iman Ibrahim first. You ask why we put name in the input. Well, as we discussed this yesterday, but I'll explain it to you. So everything in the form, every input we have in the form will be represented in the form of pairs, a key and the value pair. For example, for full name, we'll have full name is the key and Hazm being the value. So if you see here, when I submit the form, for example, you'll see that I have full name and value. These are my pairs. Every line is a pair of an entry of some sort. This is the name and this is the value. We use names and inputs specifically to have the key name. It's basically references the key name. If I don't use name here, for example, for experience, I won't be able to display the pair because I don't have a part of the pair here. Let's try it so you can better understand. Let's get here to experience, for example. If I get rid of the name, I shouldn't be able to add it to my last. See, it won't be added to my form data because it's missing a key. It can only display data in forms of key and value. Key and value. And name is what references the key. Does that answer your question?
The experience in the screen not presented.
What? Can you please repeat?
The experience,
Yeah.
in the form not
Yeah.
presented in your data.
Yes, it is not represented because I got rid of the name to explain why we need the name in the inputs. If I put it back, like I did here, we added experience and added the name. Now it should be displayed again. If I go and put 4 years of experience, you'll see that now we have it here. It's because we got rid of the name, and that's why name is useful, because we need it in order to have a key and value pairs so that our form data may process it. If we don't put in the name, then it won't be displayed in my data anymore.
Okay.
I believe we have another question that I'll look into right now. I have a question now. All data in form when submitted send the data in the server by post method. That is right because the method for form typed is met. Okay, Al-Najjar, you are right, but we're not limited to post. For example, let's say we have a server, and right now we don't have a server running. We are using purely client-based code. With the client code, we can only use the method get. In order to use post, we need to have a server, either Node.js server or PHP server. And we'll reroute our action towards the server server path. The difference being, I don't know if you remember, yesterday we talked about URL encoded form data. The difference is that when you use post, the data is not encoded in the URL, let's say in this manner, where you have // data.html, and you won't have it like this. You won't have this part in post method. You will have it in the body. You will have in the HTTP request, you will have the request dot body dot full name, and that will have your full name. Basically, it changes the where you get the information. You won't get it in the URL anymore, but in the request body, what we call the body of the request. Okay. So let's get back to our subscription form. There remains remains a couple of inputs I'd like us to see before we move on to JavaScript validation. And that is for one, checkboxes. So we'll add an input here because checkboxes are a bit tricky. If you remember yesterday, we talked about how JSONs are stronger than form data because they can manage nested data basically and have arrays as values, not only numbers and text. And basically that will show, that weakness will show when we're managing checkboxes, because since we don't have arrays and checkboxes can have multiple values, that will, and you will see how it goes, that will push us to have different keys for every possible box being checked and not a single one like we use for gender. So let's do that. Fundamentally, how it's written will be fairly similar to the radio input. So we'll copy it from there and change it. And we'll have here, let's say we want people to give us their hobbies, and my hobbies here, and we have hobbies. Let's say we like to travel. We may like to travel. We'll use not radio, but we'll use checkbox, the checkbox type. The ID will be hobbies, travel. And to illustrate my point, I will leave it as we did with the checkbox, and I'll use only the same name, the same key for all my options, like we did with the radio button. And I'll see that way I can show you the issue. I'll get rid of the required, put travel here, and do the same basically going on. Let's say, let's give a couple more options. Not travel, we already used that. Let's say sports. Sports, let's put this to a checkbox. Hobbies, sports, and the value being sports. Let's get rid of the required and add one more. That we'll call, let's say we like video games. We may like video games. Games. So let's test this out, shall we? We have pre-configured options, so not much validation required here, because we are the ones writing the values and not our users. So let's say I like to travel and I like video games. Let's put in the rest of the information and validate it and send our form. What you'll see is that in the hobbies, we only got games, while travel basically disappeared. That happens because, as we said, like form data needs a key and the value. And the weakness, let's say, of form data is that this value can only be a number or text. It can't be an array, for example, or a full-on object. And that's why yesterday, and you can get back to yesterday's course regarding that if you want to refresh your memory, we discussed how JSON as a way of gathering data may be more powerful in some cases than form data. And this is one of those cases because we can't have an array here. So how we will do without resorting to managing JSONs directly in JavaScript is that we will come here, and instead of having the same key for everyone, we'll have to add different keys each time. Every time we'll need to change the name. So they're stored in different pairs. And we'll say the value is always true if it's checked. So how that will change our form is that now, let's try this again. If I choose travel and video games, we'll get them as separate pairs. You'll see I'll get hobbies travel is true, and hobbies games is true as well. And that then we'll have to, on the server side, manage how we store this maybe in a single array or something. But form data can't manage these tricky nested values. And that's something to keep in mind when we are working with checkboxes. There remains only one input that I'd like to showcase before we move on. And that is a really good one that I like a lot, which is the hidden input. Let's say we want to track every sign up we have by giving a random ID to everyone who tries, so that we can basically track, in a sense, IPs or whatever. We want to inject, we don't want to have a label. It's a hidden input after all. And we'll use the type hidden. And we give it the name secret ID. And here we'll be given it a value that is not being made evident and that can't be changed by our user. So let's say this is a secret. And if we go back to our form, you'll see that there isn't, that this input is not displayed there. It is indeed hidden. But what's really cool about this is that if we go and fill our data and choose, we'll see that now we have this additional information, this additional key value pair with the secret ID, even though we didn't fill it and the user didn't see it. And we may change this value from JavaScript like we did, for example, yesterday, by either binding it to another input, like we did in the example of data binding yesterday, or we may just inject in it at the start using document.getElement by ID and inject a value that we randomize, or the user's IP address, or whatever we want to go to the next stage without our user interacting with. And that's basically the best way to inject this type of values in a form data. And it is the simplest manner to inject other, let's say, other key values to our form data without having to resort to complex JavaScript manipulations. Before we move on, do you guys have any questions regarding what we did up to now, or anything that might need more clarifications, or another example, maybe perhaps, that you would like to see? How to hash the password when we send it. Basically, we could hash it from JavaScript, but that might not be a good way of doing it. Why? Because when we're sending the password to, let's say we need to have a hashing algorithm. We can come to, let me show you an example. It may be easier. Let's add a file. We could have here, for let's say work on it on this JavaScript. We could have, since we have the data here, we could hash it here actually and say if my key is password, then let's make the value a variable and not a constant. Value equal hash value. And then we need to write our hashing algorithm here. We can hash the text here. And what we can do is, for example, so, it depends on how there are different algorithms that you can use, but we can, a good example of how to hash it might be encryption actually happens, like I said, like we can hash it here and have our algorithm, for example, we can here change every letter with the letter that comes after it and return a different kind of text. We'd return the hashed value, and then we'll get it as hashed. But mainly, the hashing of the password happens on the server before we put it in the database. And we must not forget about HTTPS that I believe you worked on with Mr. Safedi, which handles encryption of all requests, password included. So it is not actually handled by us directly, but by the browser. A good reason for that is that because even if we encrypt the password before sending it, we need to decrypt it on the server as well. So we need to have a whole encryption decryption system. And there is a system in place that is very well done that is called SSL. That I encourage you to look at that if you want to understand more about encryption. And you'll see that with an SSL certificate, basically, what happens, and you'll see that, for example, websites that use it have this icon saying that the connection is secure next to the URL. And that basically what that means is that every HTTP request that we send through HTTPS will be encrypted, and that a certificate shared between the server and the client will allow that data to be decrypted on the server. Otherwise, what we might do is that before we send it, we need to write our own encryption protocol, which might be very complex and will take us a lot of time to write if we were to write an example right now. But what you can do is before you send it here, in terms of, if I go back here, before we send it, we can test for the password value and encrypt it, and using a function that we write. Say write a function called encrypt, and then on our server we need another function called decrypt that will reverse that, because then we need it to be decrypted. Why? Because when the server during login, the user won't send us an encrypted password neither, so we need to be able to compare it to the previously received password. But like I said, you won't need to worry much about this layer of encryption decryption. It is really the specialty of security engineers, and in terms of web, you already have a really good interface to work with, which is HTTPS. So as long as you have HTTPS, you won't have worried very much about encryption of requests you're sending, since basically they're already encrypted. So there is really not much use to encrypting it yourself further than it already is, especially that HTTPS and SSL are trusted protocols, while your own homemade protocol may not be as secure and battle tested as SSL is. And we'll see there are really interesting libraries in the server for those who are following the full stack web specialization. You'll see that we have really good libraries on the server side to then encrypt password when you want to save it to the database. So it's not stored in the database as decrypted. But in terms of sending it from the client and JavaScript, you really don't need to worry about that as long as you enable HTTPS. But like I said, it's totally doable, but it's really not trusted in terms of browsers. In terms of like Google, for example, as a search engine, only trusts websites with SSL turned on with HTTPS. So that's important that you actually have your websites enabled with HTTPS, which today is not really hard to do. You can get free certificates from Let's Encrypt, which is let'sencrypt.org, which allows you to get a certificate to have HTTPS running. And you have a number of DNS providers. You've saw DNS with Mr. Safedi. You have Cloudflare, for example, which is a DNS provider that allows you to get a certificate for free and configure it at your DNS's level really easily as well. So really that won't be something you need to worry about in your JavaScript and in your HTML. All right, we can, I guess we can move on to the next part. It's time for us to go to the next part. So like like you guys asked earlier during this lesson, someone said if HTML attributes can be relied on for validation. And my answer to that we might need additional validation from JavaScript, and that's what we will be discussing now. So when to use JavaScript for validation, actually, let me get it back in full screen. So when to use JavaScript for validation, actually. So we have some cases when the validation properties and attributes offered by HTML5 are simply not enough. A good example for one of those cases is, for example, when you want to make your password really, want your users to use really secure passwords, you may have noticed sometimes when you sign up, it won't just ask you like we just did to have a password with a length above 8, but will actually ask you to have more advanced validation, like it wants your password to contain letters and numbers and upper cases and stuff like that. And that is not manageable through simply HTML5 attributes. So we'll need to extend that validation using our own JavaScript validators that we'll write from scratch. I suggest we get back to Code Sandbox to basically showcase that type of custom validation. So let's get back to where we were. Let me close, no, not the break, not now. Let me get back to here. We don't need actually this anymore. We can leave this, close this. Let's go back and create a new sandbox. And we create a static HTML5 sandbox simply. No need for anything else. So what we will do is first we need to get rid of our of unused code, like we always do. Let's get rid of this and get rid of all this. So we don't we only keep what we need in this exercise. So what we'll do here is quite simple. We wrote a sign up page earlier. Let's write another page for when we want to reset our password. So let's have let's have an H2 here. Let's call this website password reset. And we'll create a new form with an action that will lead us to a page called success.html. And we'll use, as usual, the method get, since we won't be using servers right now. Of course, we'll need to close this. Let's have, as usual, an input with the type submit. And let's put here the value being submit. So we need to write our success HTML page. So let's add a new file. We'll call it success.html. Want it to be an HTML file. Get rid of what we won't need and have an H2 here saying you have successfully changed your password. simply that we won't need anything else, so that when we submit our password reset form, it will redirect us to this success page saying we have managed to change our password. So let's get back to our HTML, our form, and start writing our form basically. So let's start by having the email, which will identify our user. That will be our label. And we have the return. Here we have the break line. And we'll have our input here for the email, type email, and the ID, which will be email as well. And the name, the email, and that will be required. We'll add a couple break lines for design since we're not doing much CSS here. So here I should be having my email that is validated through HTML5 like we've seen earlier. We'll also add a couple more inputs. We'll add here to an input with the old password. Let's say we have here old password, which is the old password. And another one here, which will be our, and we have our inputs type password, like we used earlier. Give it the ID. Old password, the name old password as well, and require. Keep in mind that we'll have on the server, we need to have a layer of validation as well. It's not just client-side validation. We only use client-side validation for simply to reduce the number of unnecessary requests to our server. Because you need to keep in mind that all the validations we are doing are bypassable by our users that are savvy, because they can technically get, if you go on a page, I'll illustrate this. If you go on any page, let's say you go on Reddit, for example, if we inspect the page, I seem to have made a mistake. If we inspect the page, they can actually access HTML and remove validators from here. Let's say they have a type, let's zoom in. Let's say they have here a type email. They can literally come here and change it. So they can bypass validation. So it's not a very reliable way to validate our data. We'll still need to write validation on the server. You said about the label, it is for, not from. Oh, a written from. My mistake. Thank you. I seem to be distracted, maybe. But yeah, you are right. It is for. My bad. It is my mistake. Thank you, Abu Hamda. So for, let's see if I made any other mistakes. I don't seem to have. So this is our old password that we've, that we've added. So we have an old password now. Oh, let's add a couple break lines here. And have another password that we'll call not old, but new password, because we remember we're trying to change our password. So everything in here is required, and we'll even add here our minimum length of 8. So how now what we want to do a few things. As of now, we can basically go on with our form like we did earlier, but we want to add some layer of validation in a sense where we want our new password to be more secure. Being longer than 8 is simply not enough. We want it to be different from our old password, because now we can literally use the same password. If I go here and I write test, test, and then test, test in the following, it's a success. I can literally use the same password again, and that is not right. So we want it to be different from the old password. We want it to contain numbers, and we want it to contain uppercase. And another thing we want to do is that we want to make sure that the user using this email is actually not banned from our platform. We'll add a banning mechanism where we'll have banned users, and we want to make sure that this email doesn't belong to our banned users list, and that will be part of our validation as well. So as you surely notice, these are not things that we will be able to do simply with HTML5, and we'll need to enrich our validation workflow with JavaScript. So let's create a new file. We'll call it index.js, and we'll come here and we'll simply call it. So let's use index.js and go here. So first of all, what I want to do is that I'm going to get the our 3 inputs elements in my JavaScript. So let's start by that. We'll declare a constant called email element, where we'll be getting document get element by ID, and we'll use the ID email because that's the ID we gave it in the HTML. We'll get our new password element as well with document get element by ID, and we'll use if I remember correctly, it's new password. Let me just check on that. It's new password, and we'll do the same again for our old password. Let's push this a bit to the side so we can see more of the code, and we'll just change this to old. So now we have our old password as well. Let's start by validating our, let's start simpler by adding our email validator and our banned users list. Let's say now we have banned users. This is our banned users list, and I don't want to accept any users whose email is hasm.com. I have simply been banned from the website. Now, what we want to do is that we want first to add an event listener to our email. So we'll go to email elements, and we'll add an event listener here. And we'll listen on the event input that triggers whenever we input something in it. So actually that makes sense. And we'll use a function here called validate email. That's going to be our email validator. So we need to start by writing that function now. So we'll have validate email, which will take as a parameter the event happening, of course, since it's called as a callback of the add event listener function. So now we go to we go here, and we're gonna extract our value. We'll start by that. So my value, and we'll get the event .target .value. And let's see what we get here. Let's stop for a second to make sure everything, our event listener and everything is working correctly. And let's check on our value so far. So let's look at the console. We should, every time we're writing something, it should appear here. So there. Every time I change, it will give me the new value. Every time. So as you can see, I can my function gets triggered whenever the input value changes. So let's continue. It seems everything is correct so far. So we'll need to check that this value that we're getting is not anywhere in our banned users array. We'll use an array primitive function that JavaScript gives us, which is really useful, which is called includes. So we'll go and have banned users dot includes. So if this includes my value, which means that this will return true if my value here can be found in this array. We'll add another one, test at email.com. And if my value is anywhere found there, that will return true. And it means that I have an issue with, and it should be not be validated. So we'll get the email element and we'll set custom validity, which is a really handy function we'll find in HTML elements or in JavaScript that will allow us to override the validity of an input. So we'll set our custom validity here and we'll give it simply a string with the message we want to give the user so they can correct it. So we'll say, sorry, this user is banned from using our services. We must not, or something really important that we must not forget as well is that we need to also make sure that we empty this when it's not incorrect. I'll show you why. Actually, I'll keep it as is for now. I'll keep the mistake so you can understand. What you'll see here is that I'll start by writing a banned email. Let's start with test@email.com, for example. And let's get here our password. And you'll see that it says, sorry, this user is banned from our services. If I change the email to something else, the error will remain. It won't disappear. No matter how we correct it. If it appeared once, it will never disappear. So we need to actually ourselves handle the deletion of that invalidation. So we need to say here, if it is not banned, so else, we need to actually go to the email element and set custom validity again and give it an empty string. So it knows, actually, our browser knows that if the validity string is empty, it means that it's valid. So let's try this again. If I go and use a banned email, now it will tell me this user is banned from using our services. But if I change it slightly, let's have .co only, now it works because we have corrected that validation. So that concludes what we wanted to do with the email. Let's get to the password now. Fundamentally, it will be the same thing. So we'll add an event listener like we did for the email. We'll do it for the new password. And we'll call a function that we'll call validate password, which will be our password validator. We'll need now to declare that function, validate password, and it will take the event. And like we did for the password like we did for the email parts, we'll start by getting our value. So my value is going to be the event, the target, dot value. Okay, so now we should be getting our password value every time they write something new in the new password element. First thing we want to do is make sure that our new password is different from the old one. How do we do that? It's quite simple. We're gonna compare our value to the old password element value. If they are the same, then we'll need to add a custom validity to our new password, like we did with the element email element. We'll say custom validity, and we'll give it a message saying new passwords must be different from the old ones. And we must make sure that we don't forget to give an else statement where we correct this. We need to have here the new password element that set custom validity to an empty string. Why you don't return null value at if-else statements? That is a good question. And actually, let's see if it, usually the HTML likes to have a string value in the validity. But for the sake of the example, let's try that. It may work as well. Let's try it simply. Let's say here we return null, or return nothing, which should be null as well. But let's use null just for the sake of the example. So let's use a banned email. This URL user is banned. And if I put null, you see what happens? Basically, it says that there is an error in our validity called null, because it expects you to give it the error here. So if you put null, it's not. Yes, set custom validity is a built-in function in JavaScript that you'll find in any HTML element. That is an input, not anyone. You won't find it in, in headers or paragraphs or anything like that, but every input element has a set custom validity function built in. As for the question about the null value, does that answer your question, Mahmoud? You asked why I don't return null value in the else statement here in set custom validity. I just showcased that if you do that, if you put null, then it considers that null is the error and will still return that it's not valid, but you will just say null in the place of the error string. I don't know if I understood you well. What you mean here? You mean here return null? Like this? Is this what you mean? Because I simply don't have to do it, because I don't like this, but in the if else means here. That's what you mean then? Because simply this is a void function. I'm not expecting a return. If the add event listeners, here expect a void function. Like if you look at the description at the
أنا
end.
أقصد
Hello.
أنا أقصد استخدام النل إن
إيه.
بدل الدالة يعني set custom validate.
لأنه إذا لا نستعمل set custom validity الerror is not going to go. You mean this, if this is what you mean, and I guess if I did understand correctly, so you mean not use this and go with a return null here. If we do that, the error will not disappear, basically. If I go, for example, and use a banned email, let's get back to this. If I change the email later on, we agree that this no longer matches any of the banned emails, the error will remain. It will not disappear. It will become null. We need to set the custom validity to an empty string. If we don't do that, the error remains. This is what says it's valid. A valid input is an input with the validity where the validity is an empty text. It needs to be an empty text. It can't be anything else. So that's why we use it. It doesn't matter what we return. Actually, it's a void function because the return value is not even used here. If you look at the event listener documentation, you'll see in this example, you'll see that it takes a void function. At the end of here, you see add event listener options, it takes void, which means that it doesn't expect a return from the function. So no matter what we return, it actually changes nothing. And we don't have to return. What matters though, is that we set custom validity to an empty string, otherwise it will never be valid. That's how we say it is valid. Otherwise, once it's not valid, it can never go back to a valid state. That's why we need this, and we don't need the return null. Actually, we don't need any return in this kind of functions, since it's void. It doesn't expect any format and return. All right, let's move on with our password. If there is no more questions, let's look at our password. Okay, where were we? We were making sure that our password is different from the old one, and we wrote the code. So now we need to test it. Let's write in the old password, let's write test, and let's write test, and the new password as well. If we submit, it should tell us, oh, I didn't correct the old one. I'm sorry. I need to put this back like it was before what we were discussing. So let's go test again, test again. And you'll see that now it says a new password must be different from the old ones. So our custom validator is working. And we can no longer write passwords that are the same as our old password. So if I add a character here, it's no longer different. It now allows me to change my password. It says you have successfully changed your password. So our validator works, but we still need to add extra layers of validation. We have a few more that we discussed. First, we want to also make sure before the else here, I'll push this back. And we want to also to make sure that our new password contains numbers and uppercases. So how do we do that? We're going to add an else if statement, and we're gonna say we're gonna use functions that we're going to write that we didn't write yet, that we're going to call contains number and give it our value. And we're gonna also write another function that is called contains uppercase my value. And if any of these are true, let's say we have, it must, if it doesn't contain a number, or if it doesn't contain an uppercase, we want to be setting a custom validity of saying that it must at least contain one letter and an uppercase character. Now what remains to be done is that we need to write both of these functions actually. It seems we have a question in the meantime. Why, when you click on submit answer on success, what the code write to do this? So here, if we go back, it's actually the same as we did yesterday, but simpler. You'll see that the form action is success.html. And the method is get. That means that when the submit of the form is triggered, it's going to send the form data to success.html. That's all we did. All the rest is managed by the form. Is that clear, Abu Hamda? Or do you want me to repeat that? Well, if that's clear for you, thank you for the question. I'm sure that was maybe not clear for someone else. So questions are always good. And thank you for asking questions. It's actually very, very important for me as well to know where you're at. So let's continue with our example. We now need to write our contains number and contains uppercase functions, which we will do right now. We'll go here and write for two functions that take a value. We're gonna call a function called, create a function called contains number that takes a value. And we'll also say here, it takes text actually. It always takes text. And we're gonna write another function contains uppercase that takes the same. And here, to illustrate the question that we got earlier about returns, these are not void functions. Why? Because I expect them to return a Boolean. I expect them to return true or false. So these will need to have a return, and it needs to be a true or false statement. So what we'll do is that we'll start with the contain number function. And let's say we will start here by saying this one is always true before writing anything. Because like I said, these are not void functions. We expect a Boolean. And if I put the mouse on the function, you'll see that the editor understands and says that this function returns a Boolean. If I get rid of the return, it will say void if I put my mouse cursor on it. So we want to keep it as a Boolean return. We'll say, let's say we return true always. Oh, I forgot this. And let's write our contains number function. So we write a loop, actually. We're going to loop. What are we going to loop through? We're going to loop through, say, just reduce this. We're going to loop through the text. And what we're going to do is we're going to take for every, we're going to take character. And how we're going to do that is we're going to take text.character at y. And what this will do is it will give us specific character. Let's say, for example, we have Hazm. This will get triggered for H, then A, then Z. You get it. It will go through every character in my text. So what I want to do for every character, in this case, for every character, I want to check if it's a number. Is my character a number? How I will do that is I will test if is not a number. There is a built-in function in JavaScript, which is actually we can't use Abu Samhadana. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce the name correctly, but we can't use type of because actually I will explain this right away. It's a very interesting question. Because of this, I'll actually stop writing this right now, and I'll just return true here as well. What I want to do is I'll show you console.log, and I want you to see here the test, and let's write a type of 4, because this will be a text, remember. So if we write type of 4, what you'll see in the console is it's a string, it's not a number. And this can put us in error. If I wrote 4 like this, then yeah, it will say it's a number, but we have it in a string. So that actually is not usable. Let's try this out as well. It's actually very interesting that you asked this. Actually, this is really fun. Let's try this out, shall we? Let's say type of parse int of 4. This should work correctly. So yes, you are correct. Let's clear our console so it's maybe better. Yes, it's a number, so that's good. But what if we wrote a character here? And refresh. See, it's always a number. So that doesn't tell me that isn't correct neither, because if I write something that isn't a number, when parsing int, it will become a number anyway. So it doesn't actually correct me, tell me if the character is a number or not. I don't know if that's clear for you, Abu Hamza, why we can choose parse int here. Okay, so I'd like to show you a really neat built-in function. So the guys working on JavaScript were ready for this use case and wrote a really neat function for us that is really practical and really easy to use. So what we'll do is that we'll test not the type of, we'll not test the type of parse int, but what we will do is use a function that is built in, is called is not a number, is none, and we'll simply give it our character. And that is it. Is none will return what we wanted to return. Let's say maybe you want to try this like we did earlier before. Let's add the console.log test here and give it a spin. And is none of 4. And let's say it gives us the results we expect. Let's clear this first. And see, it says it's false because it is a number. It is a number, and this function tests if it is not a number. So if we wanted to say if it is a number, we have to add this. And now you'll see that it tells us that it is a number. Maybe that's clearer to understand. And if we put a, it will say false. It's not a number. So this fills our need perfectly. So let's use it here. We'll also need to account for something else. We'll also need to test if our character isn't an empty space. We don't want it to be an empty space. And if it isn't, then if it is, our character is a number, we can return true because we found a number in our loop. Outside of the loop, though, if we looped through it all without ever reaching the return, we'll return false here. And let's get rid of the return we put here. So now what it will do is it will loop through every character in the text, and if it finds a number, it will return true, and we'll have a result. If not, if it goes through the whole loop without ever finding a number and returning, it will simply return false. So let's try this out, shall we? Let's put in an email. Let's say we put our password test, and in the new password, actually what I'm going to do is maybe get rid of the type password here so you can see what I'm writing. It may be easier. So let's write again. Let's write here test. As a reminder, if we write test again, it will say it's not different. And if we simply add an A, now it will say it must at least contain one letter and another one letter. It seems I was mistaken in writing. It must at least contain one number, I mean. Do this again. It must at least contain one number and an uppercase character. So if we replace the A with a 2, now it works fine. It doesn't check for the uppercase because we haven't written the code yet. We always return true. So we'll do actually the same that we did earlier. We'll have a loop that goes through every character. And now, though, we need to have a different test here for the number. So what we'll do is we'll need to make sure it is not a number. And we need it to be not a number. And we need to check if it's an uppercase or not. What we'll do is that we'll say that the text dot character, I'm sorry, the character must not be equal. Oh, excuse me, it must be equal to the character that to uppercase. So that what that will do is that basically, if in this example is my character uppercase, what that will do is that when comparing this, this will compare either if we have A, it's not uppercase, A will not be equal to A because the other one is uppercase. But if it is already uppercase, then it will be equal to itself when we turn it to uppercase. So that's a good way to check if the character is already uppercase or not. Yes, we are done. Let's just test this and go into break, please. So we're done. We're just going to test this and go into break time. I'm sorry, this took maybe a bit longer, but we'll be going in break in a minute. Let's just test this and go on our break. So let's see now if we do the same test as earlier, and it will say it must contain an uppercase, and if we add the uppercase, now it works. So that's about it. If you don't have any questions, we can definitely go on a 10-minute break. Does anyone have any questions? That is everyone that's so tired they want to go on break. We want them to be different. We don't want you to use the same password that we are already using. That's what we did. We wanted, if you look at the validate password, we made sure that our password is different from the old one. Because if your password, let's say it's test, you don't want the new one to be test as well. Otherwise, why change passwords? If no other questions, we can definitely go on break. and then we'll head to DOM manipulation, where we'll do something really fun. See you in 10 minutes. Why have I written 15? See you in 10 minutes, and we can resume. Let's say, okay, let's say it's 38. So let's say you can get 12 minutes. Let's get back here. Let's meet back here at 50. So let's say, what time is it in Gaza? Let's say it's at 3:50 p.m. If that's right.
Sure, 10 minutes.
Okay. Let's take a 10-minute break. See you guys in 10 minutes then. Hello again. The break is now supposedly over. Is everyone back? And can we go forward with the lesson now? Okay. Nice. Everyone here? I see, I see.
We here.
Good. Let's go. Let's move forward with the lesson, and I'm sure we'll have fun with the remaining part as well. So next on our list is the DOM manipulation, which is a really cool and really fun to do in React later on when we'll get to React. So what is the DOM really? We hear that word a lot. The DOM, or document object model, is an interface for web pages. It's basically an API that is made available by the browser, allowing software rewrite in JavaScript to manipulate and read content of a page, its structure and its styles as well. So what we need to understand that it's a common misconception. A lot of people make mistake on this. The DOM is not your HTML source code, and it's not the data being displayed on your page neither. Because even though it is created from your HTML source code, they can actually differ from each other in a few situations. Most importantly, if your HTML structure is not valid. For example, if you don't write the head and the body tags in your HTML and go directly writing inputs and forms and headers, it will work. But if you inspect the element on the page, you'll notice that the head and body have been added automatically by the browser to generate a valid DOM. So the DOM is always a valid HTML, even though the HTML you've written is not a valid one. Also, a difference between your HTML and the DOM is when you manipulate the DOM with JavaScript, which is what we are going to do in the rest of the session. So how and why do we manipulate the DOM? When you're structuring a web page, you don't necessarily know everything you need to know in its final structure. And a good example of this is a comment section. Let's say you're writing you're writing a website where you can showcase, I don't know, pictures of cats, and you want your friends to come and be able to post comments on those pictures. You don't know ahead of time how many comments there are under the picture. You don't know how many paragraphs to put to basically display these comments. So what you would do is that you would manipulate the DOM to add paragraph tags to the DOM for as many comments that you need to display. And how we do this is through JavaScript with a few built-in functions that allow us to do just that. A good example of this, like we just discussed with the comment section, can be like this. We create a new element. We have under the document interface, we have a function that is called create element that will allow us to create a new HTML element using its tag name. For example, here we're using P for paragraph. Next, we'll need to edit this. We need to create the text node, which is going to be inside that element. We're going to create, again, using a function that is built in within the document interface. We're going to use create text node with I love JavaScript, which basically is going to display that message in the paragraph. What we will do then is that we will append that text to our comment. We'll use our new comment element, and we'll append child to add the content to it. And finally, we'll append child again to add the whole new comment element that we just created to our body. Document.body being the body of our HTML. So basically, that is how we manipulate the DOM, by creating elements, changing them, there are multiple ways that we can change them. We can add classes, we can add styles, and we'll see that more in depth when we'll be writing the code. But there are a multitude of ways that we can do this. Some of you may tell me, some of you may say, isn't it limiting that when we create an element, we can only give it the ID of the tag? What if I want to put, for example, the attributes like we did in the input earlier? We used required, we use max length, we use min length, we use so many attributes. Isn't that too complicated if we needed to, for example, add these inputs, create them in JavaScript? And we'll see that there is, when we're writing the code, that there is a really good solution for this from JavaScript, which is called the template element. Basically, if when creating an element, we create template here, we can change it so that it takes anything we want in terms of string, and we'll write a function on that later so you can better understand. You'll probably understand this better with the example anyway. So let's jump right into it. But what I will suggest in this coding session is that maybe we make things more fun. We've been playing with forms for a long time. And I think you are at a good point now regarding forms. We've written forms, we've validated forms from HTML, we've validated them from JavaScript. It won't be much different if we just add inputs from JavaScript. It will relatively be the same. So what I suggest here is that we have a bit of fun with our coding. And what we'll do, I don't know if any of you guys had this toy growing up as a child. There's the children drawing board. I don't know if you had this. I don't know if you can still see my screen. I don't know if you had this toy. People who had it, please say in the chat that you had this. Where you had the pen and you put it on the board and it leaves black trays where you can draw and then delete it and draw again. Did you guys have this growing up? All right. So the exercise and the fun of the exercise, what we're going to do is that we're going basically rebuild this toy with HTML and JavaScript. We'll recreate this toy, and it's going to be fun. And it's interesting how we will do this using DOM manipulation. So I suggest
this is for kids.
Yes, this is for kids. And we're going, I don't know if any of you guys have kids, but you'll be able to write the code and let them play with it, which is a good bonus. So yeah, let's say we're writing code for our kids now. It's always important. I find it's always important to have fun with the programming language you're using. It's the best way to learn. So forms and everything are extremely useful, but it's always important as well to apply any notions you have learned to simply have fun. So let's illustrate that here and go create our drawing toy. Let's jump right in our code sandbox. I hope you guys can see my screen well. And we'll go create a new sandbox. Everyone can see my screen, right? You're seeing code sandbox correctly. I hope. So let's create a new sandbox. As usual, we're going to go create a static HTML5 sandbox. And here, what we're going to do is that we're, as usual, going to get rid of any unused tags. And since we're manipulating the DOM, we're not going to write anything in this. And it's going to be a good concept because when you're writing later on, we're going to learn React. You're going to write nothing in your HTML, which basically how React operates. It uses a virtual DOM and JSX, and it constantly manipulates the DOM. React is a DOM manipulation library, basically. So it is a good way to know how that is done and how we can play with that. So all we're going to do is create a container for our DOM manipulation. This is just to contain our work. That's all we're going to write, that, and we're going to call a script called index.js. That's all we're going to do in our HTML. That's it. We're done with the HTML. That's it. So now what we want to do is that we want to go and create our index.js. But actually, forgive me, we are not done with HTML because for the first time since we started, I'm going to be writing some CSS as well. So let's add our style sheet as well. And of course, let's create our style.css. It's not going to be a long style sheet. So basically, we want to only want two things out of it. And we don't need much. We just need a container here. We want to style our container, and we want to style an active class, which this will be basically in the drawing. Let's go back to the example, the children drawing board. What we want to do is that everything in our HTML where we have drawn needs to have this active class. So we want to be able to draw for now only in black. But so yeah, all this is going to do then is like we're going to add a background color. And that background color is going to be black. As for the container, we'll add some minor styling. We'll say to display block. We'll add a border, so we'll see our board, the borders of our board. And we'll give it a border radius because we want it to be slightly round, a little like this. Basically, we want it to be round a bit. So let's add it, give it a border radius of 5 pixels, and give it a font size of 0 because we're not going to be writing anything, and give it a small margin on the vertical sides. So that's basically all we're going to need for the CSS. What that's going to do is that we're going to create as the board we're going to draw in. As you can see it here, but it's only width, but you see there is nothing in it, so we can draw yet. But that will be done in JavaScript anyway. So basically at this point, we're done with our HTML and CSS. Everything that we're going to write is going to be in the GS file. First thing what we need to do is get our container where we're going to manipulate the DOM and basically do everything. So let's get it, the container element, and we'll get document.getElementById, and we call it container. So let's get the container. That's it. So now we want to be making, creating, what we want to do is basically create a grid. By those who don't understand what I mean this. Basically, we're going to create a big grid like this, where every cell of the grid is going to be drawable and can be active and become black. It's going to be white at the start, but will eventually be able to become black and allow us to draw. So before anything, I want us to define the size of our grid. So let's give it a size. Let's say it's 32. Basically, the size is going to be how many cells are in the grid. And we'll give it a size of 32. And a grid size, this is going to be the size in pixels of every cell. We'll put it at 10. Okay, what is wrong here? Did I do something wrong? Oh, I added a star here. So this should be good. So now what we want to do is that we want to start making our grid. Let's create a function that we're going to call make grid. And we'll just call it make grid. We'll start by just verifying that everything is set. Hello world. And verify that we have everything we need. The container element, the size, and the grid size. Let's check if everything is there and ready for us to start working with. So yeah, hello world. So a mistake there, spelling mistake. I don't like spelling mistakes. So hello world, we have our container element, we have our size, and we have our grid size. So everything is perfect. We're ready to start working. So what do we want to do? We want to, first of all, we want to change this. As you've seen, it's flat. We want it to get bigger, and we want it to get bigger thanks to these values. So let's get rid of our console.log. Actually, we don't need this much. Let's reduce this so I can see better. Let's reduce this and have container element. This is a form of DOM manipulation. What we're going to do is we're going to inject style. So style this, we could have written in style.css, but we wanted to be able to change according to this. So we'll go .width is going to be our size of 32 square of the 32 squares, and we have every square is going to be 10 pixels. So the total width is going to be size times the grid size, and we'll give it px at the end. Why did we do it like this? Why not just write width here? The problem is if we write the width here and let's say it's 500 pixels, for example, the problem here is that we can't change this from JavaScript. We want this to change because we want our grid to be different sizes. We want that if we choose to have a bigger grid, if I choose to have a bigger grid, I want it to change as well. Actually, let's if I wanted this to become, for example, to become 64, it gets bigger. If I want it to be smaller, I can put it 16 and it gets smaller, as you can see on the preview on the right. So what this is doing is that it's changing the CSS dynamically. Yes, so it's going, if I put 32 here, this is going to be 32 times 10, and it's going to be 320 pixels. If I change this to 64, it's going to be 64 times 10, and it's going to be 640 pixels. Oops, not 6,000, 640 pixels. So that allows me to have CSS that changes from JavaScript. And that is a form of DOM manipulation, because we're editing basically what is going to be eventually rendered without having to have it. We have no width here, and we don't need to have it. So here we're choosing the width. As you can see, if I change it, you can look at the right and it changes accordingly. So we're going to keep it at 32. That's a good size, I believe. So now what we want to do is that we want to start creating these squares here. I want these squares to be created. So what we want to do, what do we say? We said the size is 32 squares. So basically it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 32 squares in width and 32 squares in height. And every square takes 10 pixels. So what we're going to do to draw our squares basically is we're going to write a loop. Let's put this to E because it's shorter. And we're going to loop to size times size. Why are we doing times size? Because like I said, we have 32 in like here and 32 like here. So the total number of squares will be 32 times 32. That will give us the total number of squares we'll have on our grid. So maybe it is clearer if I write it here. Total number of squares is size times size. which is going to be width times length. It's going to be the same here because we're drawing a square shaped board. Now that we wrote in our loop, we need to do the actual work and inject every square into our container. So what we're going to do is that we need to create now a grid element. And we could do this. Basically, we could do document.createElement and create a div. And then we could come here and do grid element.class list.add the class that we're going to call grid. That is basically like we shown earlier in the presentation, but we're not going to do that. We're going to comment this, and we're going to do I'm going to show you what I talked about earlier. I probably wasn't very clear. I talked to you about the template element, which is specifically written so that we can written for DOM manipulation. It's only useful in DOM manipulation, and I want you to see this. So what we're going to do is that we're going to create another function that we're going to call HTML2element. And it takes HTML text and creates a JavaScript HTML element from it. So what that will do is that basically we start with a constant, which is going to be our template element. And we're going to use document.createElement, the built-in createElement function. And we're going to create an element, like we said, called template, which is only used in DOM manipulation. And it's very useful because what we can do then is first we can trim. We need to trim our HTML. What does trim do is basically it gets rid of spaces. For example, if I have, I don't know, let's say div/div, it will become div. It will get rid of all spaces. And we need that. That is required, otherwise it will generate an error. So then we can go template.inner HTML, and we'll give it the HTML that we have trimmed. And then we can finally return our template, and we can .content.firstChild. And that allows us to have, from the text that we give here, a JavaScript HTML element. So what we do here is that we created an element, a template element for the manipulation. We trimmed our HTML, we put it inside the template, and then we can get the element by going to template content and first child, which is what we are going to return. So instead of writing this code here, what that allows us to do is to go and create a grid element. And instead of creating the element and giving it classes, giving it everything, what that allows us to do is directly go and do our user function, HTML2element, and use div class equal. Okay, maybe I need to do single quotes here, equal grid. And that will create this HTML and give it back as an element. And if we log it, let's do this. Log grid element. We should see that it's creating many grid elements for every cell that we want to add. So we should have a lot of logs here, a lot of them, specifically 320. And everyone will have this. It will be an HTML div element. You see the type is correct, HTML div element. And it's going to be like we gave it here. That allows us to convert our text to an element thanks to the function we wrote. So let's continue. Let's get rid of our console.log. We need now to inject our grid elements in the container. But first, we need to add some things to it, because now it's just a div. It does absolutely nothing. Yes, we're going to append it to the body. If we append it, nothing will show. If we let's do that actually, maybe so you can see. If we go here and excuse me, and append container element dot append child grid element, and then we console.log at the end after the we console.log the container element what we'll see is that nothing happens here, but it will have a lot of grid elements inside of it. In the HTML currently there are a lot of divs, but since they have no width, no height, no nothing is actually displayed. So we need to give them a width and the height for them to take space in our container. Otherwise, they're here, but they do absolutely nothing. So let's get rid of our console.log and give it, before appending it, let's give it some styling, shall we? Let's give it first, like we said, let's give it a width and the size. Grid element dot width is grid size. We already established that this is what it is. We already have a value for that, a variable, which is going to be our grid size, and we'll just add px to it so it knows it's in pixels, because that's how we express in the CSS. We'll do the same for the height, since they are square shaped. And now you'll see I'm sorry. Now what you'll see is that we still have nothing, but it's because we need to add a display to it. So what we'll need to do is we'll add here the display and no, I'm sorry, not add the display. I've been mistaken. It's because here we forgot to go through style. There is nothing in width and height. So now our cells are taking space into the grid, but it is long. It is supposed to be squared, and that is because our squares are being rendered one after the other. If we, for example, add a background color, it will make more sense. Color, and we give it red, it will become more evident, maybe. See, they are not being displayed one next to the other. We have a simple way of fixing that. And that is by giving them the display property in the styling of inline block that will make them show one next to the other. I seem to have made a mistake. Or not. Well, now our board is correct and square shaped. Does anyone have any questions at this point, or should we continue with the functionalities? Yes, we could use display flex as well. It is also a solution. I want to keep it simple for now, but we could use display. We could use also CSS grid. There are multiple ways we can do this in terms of display. I just found this to be the simplest for this example, since it's not really focused on CSS. I want to focus on JavaScript for this exercise. But yes, it can definitely be done with flex by doing flex direction, display flex direction being as a column and handling it from there. But let's keep it focused on JavaScript for now. So now we have our squares in place. We need to be able to draw, and that's what we'll do. If you remember in our CSS, we already did a class for that called active, which takes the background black. And basically what we want to do is that we want every square that we're drawing, when the mouse gets on top of it, even once, we want it to become black. And how we'll do that is basically by adding to every one of these its own event listener in the for loop. In the for loop, we're going to go to the grid element, which we created in the for loop. So for every grid element here in our DOM, we're going to be adding an event listener. And this event listener will be listening to mouse enter. So basically when the mouse enters it, and we're going to give it a function, which they're going to write here. And that function, this function is going to basically do a simple, very simple thing. It's going to take our element and add and go to the class list and add the active class. And by that time, I can say we're done with the exercise, because now, and this is the fun part, we get to use our toy. What would happen is that when the mouse enters, it will become black. Let's try drawing, and there you go. We are effectively drawing on our children's toy. And we can make this bigger if we want. We can have a size of 64 if we want to have a bigger drawing board, and we can draw here. We can draw whatever we want. I don't know, I'm not particularly good at drawing on children's drawing boards, but you see what I mean. There we go. So that's our, I think it's supposed to be a bunny, but yeah, you get my, you get what I mean by having fun with JavaScript. So now you can go and make this for your children. If someone has a child or a brother, a brother or sister, a niece, whatever, you can have them have a good laugh with your JavaScript skills. And I think it's important as well. And it illustrates perfectly what we wanted to learn with DOM manipulation. So as anyone have any questions on the code we have just written to achieve this? It's all clear? See, things are clearer when it's fun. That's why I wanted this exercise to be maybe more fun than we did up to now. So yeah, that's DOM manipulation. Yes, this is a rabbit talk. I think. DOM manipulation, this is it. And it will become more clear going into React, because basically the guys on React use DOM manipulation, and their concept of virtual DOM basically to write the whole library. And GSX is based on that. If you go into React, you'll see that basically there is always an HTML file, and all you can find in it is a div with an ID. And basically what React does is it puts everything in that div with that ID, just like we just did. So technically, you could write your own rendering library now. You have the knowledge necessary to do that. That's about it for the exercise. As usual, you'll have all the code in the presentation. If we go here, you can see that everything is here. You can follow the link and access the code. And I encourage you to write your own and maybe edit it a bit, have it change opacity every time you go through it. Because now, as you can see, it's always black. Maybe have it at the first time you go through a grid, have it gray, then a bit darker until it reaches black. And well, there is multiple ways you can have fun with this. You can add an eraser to delete certain cells and have them become white again. There is so many ideas you can do with this just to have fun. So what I want to get into next is the assignment. We're going to have an assignment to put into practice what we learned the last couple of days. We learned a lot with forms and validation, data binding and the manipulation. And I want you to put all that into practice into an assignment, which will look like a client's assignment, which we will probably have a lot of in the future. So what in this assignment I want you to do is that please use everything you learned and consider the following scenario. A potential client is contacting you. You got a phone call, and this client is building a movie streaming platform, their own version of Netflix, and they need your help with writing a tool to create pages showcasing their movies so that users can see what kind of movies they have, what genre they are, what actors are in the movie, etc. So you will need to use the skills you acquired so far to build the form, to basically input all of that data, the movie name, the actors, the genre, the year of production. I will let you handle that. I want you to decide what to put in the form, and I want you to decide how to validate it and what seems logical to you. Because in the real world, basically, when clients contact you, they rarely give you any more information. They ask you, they have a need, and you need to fill it. And I want to see you do that. So the need is there. We need you to create a form to input movie information. I want you to use data binding to have a preview panel so they can see while they're writing in real time in the form, they can see a preview of how it may look. And I want you on submit to basically show them the final page. So that's the need. So you have 2 pages, the form and preview page, and the final display page, just like we did in our examples with the index.html and the data.html. So that's how that would look. Let's take a look at the first page. Like I said, we'll have the form on the left. You will put your inputs here, whatever you need. And for example, if this input here is the title, you'll have a preview panel on the side and the same page. And as you are writing in the input, I want the title to be changing here. When you're writing the year of production, same thing. I want the data to be bound so that you see the year, synopsis, etc. And when you're done with all the form and you submit it, it takes you to a page. I will give you an example. It gives you a final page, like you can see, for example, for Mr. Robot on Rotten Tomatoes. You can ignore the critics here. I want to see the title. I want to see the year of production, the synopsis, whatever you decide to do. You don't need to make it exactly like this. You can have your own. This is just for inspiration. But the final result needs to be a page of whatever movie I am trying to input using the form. And please show me the CSS skills you required with Mr. Safedi as well in this final page. I am hoping to see really fun things from you. So that is the assignment. You can work on it next week. And if you have any issues, of course, you can use either WhatsApp to get help either from me or also from your fellow students. I hope you can help each other. but I will also be trying to help you as much as I can. We'll have coaching sessions that will plan with Isra, that will maybe divide into groups, so you can ask me questions during the week as well on a call. So maybe if you're having difficulties. Is that clear for everyone, or do you have questions regarding the assignment? Does anyone have anything to say about the assignment? So, okay, it seems it's clear. Could you list the tasks as steps? Okay, I will add that to the presentation before sending it to you to give you the steps, but keep in mind, a slide. What do you mean a slide? A slide with the tasks, like Brahim said? Yes, you will be getting that. Starting next week after the assignment, we should be starting into React. I'll be confirming that with Mr. Safedi, since we'll be both dividing React courses between us two. So next week should be around React, and please let me coordinate with Mr. Safedi before giving you any more details than that. But before our next lessons, we should have been technically done with the assignment. And according to the PowerPoint, yes, as I did yesterday, I will be sharing that on WhatsApp and our Discord server that we created yesterday. For those of you who didn't join, I will generate a new link right now so you can join, since it's also a good place for us to exchange. And a lot of you guys are already on it anyway. So here is the link, and you can join through it. I put it on the chat. But otherwise, I'll be sending the link to this presentation on the Discord and on the group WhatsApp for those who don't use the Discord. You will have all source code, of course, in the slides, and all the slides we went through. And I'll make sure to add another slide with all the tasks required as steps to do the assignment. But please, I want you to keep having a certain amount of freedom with how you approach the assignment, because like I said, I want you to be ready for clients, and most of the time, clients don't give you steps or specific precise elements. What a client will do is that they will give you a need. They will ask you to give them a way to generate a page. They won't necessarily know enough to be giving you steps. So please give yourself the freedom to assess a need and use your own knowledge to basically create your own steps and reach the need of a client, because that's our ultimate goal. Basically, our goal is to get you guys ready to handle clients and monetize your skills. You're acquiring skills, but it's important that you use them to be able to use them with clients and monetize it. I mean, I think that's why we're here, to get you ready to do that. So please allow yourself that freedom. It seems we have some spare time. We still have 25 minutes before today's session is done. Is there anyone who would like to review a specific part of the lesson? Because it seems we have time to do so. We can go back, explain more, have more examples. So please tell me if there is something in particular that you would like to review at this stage. Anyone? And anyone with anything they want to review? Nothing? All right, then I'll go forward and review things myself, but can you please tell me at least which part of the lesson is the least clear? Do you want me to do more examples in validation or in DOM manipulation, for example? Which would you prefer? Since we have the time for it, anyway. The deadline for submitting an assignment is prior to the next session, I believe. So you have, I believe you have a week to do this assignment, so that by next week I can take a look at them and maybe have a bit of the session to go through recurring mistakes or things that were done well, or fix things that seems that were maybe not clear enough. So the deadline would be before next Saturday.
Yeah, but I think Hazem, they have to check the assignment and make sure if it's okay before the coaching session on Wednesday, to be prepared or to maybe evaluate if they have any problem or need any help.
Yeah, they indeed need to start working on it before Wednesday, because like Ssl said, Wednesday morning we can have an hour of coaching session, so we can address your difficulties. So it would be nice if you have difficulties by then, but that means that you would have started the assignment to have difficulties. But I don't think Ssl they need to have they need to be done with the assignment. They need to, but they need to at least be at 60%, I guess.
Yes.
Well, it seems that everything is clear for everyone. Ssl, how do you suggest we, do you have a suggestion about the remaining time, or should I just go back myself and add a few examples to what we just saw?
First, I think they have to be more active and not shy to ask, or if anything is not okay. Maybe we can get some feedback on the way of lecturing today, of they have faced anything, the speed of your talking, maybe the English. We have some feedback for yesterday meeting, so maybe we have some discussion, and maybe you can go through the material in 5 minutes, so you can review the material for the attendees here. If anyone maybe remember that there's something he's not getting well, so he can ask their questions.
Okay, great suggestion, actually. I think there are less questions indeed today, so I thought there would be more questions with the DOM manipulation, but it seemed it was clear for everyone, which goes to show that it's easier to understand when it's fun. But please tell me if you have any feedback regarding my way of teaching you guys. Is there things that I could do better? And please don't be shy to ask. Yes, actually, in the presentation, you will find all the links. Like here, the manipulation link, the cost of validation link, and the link here. All links are in the presentation, which I will be sharing with you guys on the Discord and on the WhatsApp. Actually, I will send it in the chat now as well if you want, maybe. That might be a good opportunity since everyone is here. Let's share this with you guys. Copy the link. And here is the link of the presentation, and all links of Sandboxes are in the said presentation. Same goes for yesterday's session, actually. Please don't be shy. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. Am I talking too fast? Is my English not clear? Would you prefer we have more time and less elements to view per session? Is the format good? Do you not like Scott's? Like, please, any feedback. You can even be mean. I won't be sad. Yes, I will review your code on GitHub for the assignment. If you want me to review your code out of the assignment, let's say you're doing exercises on your own, I encourage that. Please don't wait on assignments to play with JavaScript. That's why I wanted to make this the last exercise fun, It's to encourage you to do fun things with JavaScript. And please do not hesitate if you make something fun and creative to share it with me. It will be my pleasure to try it out and to review your code and give you ways to improve it, basically. So yes, you can definitely send me links to GitHub out of the assignment, but yes, I will be reviewing everyone's code on GitHub for the assignment as well. No feedback about my way of lecturing? Am I there? I don't believe I'm that good of a teacher. So please give me ways I can improve, guys. I promise I won't be sad. You can send it on either the WhatsApp group, the Discord group, or directly to my email, which I will give you right now in the chat. Any channel will be fine. Actually, on the Discord, I put in place a room specifically for that. You have a room with assignments help, which can be either to ask help from your fellow students, because I think probably some of you understand some things better than others, while others understand some other things. So I think it would be really cool to work as a team and help each other out. So you can go there. I will definitely be there as well, and I can help you and I can review your code if you post it there on the Discord. But yeah, you can send me on WhatsApp or the email as well. It won't be an issue. Anyone else? Otherwise, I will do like Ssl suggested, and I will go through today's material in a few minutes to maybe refresh. Yes, it's because the PowerPoint for read only, we can't install it. What do you mean install it? It's you can read it online, right? You can download it?
Yes, you can install all files if you want.
Yes, I just put it in read only, so even by mistake you can't, change things for the other students, or even by mistake that happened to me before. So it's just to keep it in the way it already was for all the students. But yeah, you can download the file and change it if you want.
You can download, yes.
Good. I will, since everyone's here, I will use this opportunity to share with you yesterday's lesson as well. I already shared it on Discord and WhatsApp, but I will share it again on here. Let's get rid of this so we can have, everyone can have it. So here I will share this. Where was I? The chat. Yeah, the chat. So there you go. This is yesterday's presentation as well. For those who didn't get the link on WhatsApp, on Discord, or anything like that. So if no one has feedback for me, but please don't be shy, and if you didn't express it now, you can definitely express it through email or whatever. I am always happy to get messages from you guys. Oh, a screenshot, please let me check. Let's check the screenshots. It says here you're trying to change it. I mean, if you want to download, you should just go to File and Download. Otherwise, I'll try and upload the file here myself. You can go. I don't know if you see my screen. Hamza, but technically you could go to File here and download PowerPoint. And it should allow you to download the PowerPoint. Anyway, I'll download it and send it myself, maybe. I'll send it from my, I'll send it myself. So desktops, libraries.
Mr. Hazem,
Yes.
I think in the assignment list requirements easy to read, and what do you have in your assignment?
You think it's not very easy to read?
I think.
Yeah, like I said, I agree. It was actually on purpose. I will add a slide with tasks right now. Let's add a slide here, new slide with the tasks.
Yes. Good.
But like I said, I really want you to be able to have the freedom of imagining the need yourself, because you won't be getting this from clients like ever.
Nice.
But I will be writing as soon as we're done here. I will be writing here steps and tasks to better maybe explain what you need to do. I'll do that as soon as we're done here. So we can, when you go back to the presentation, you should have everything explained. In the meantime, in the few minutes we have, I'll do a quick review of what we've seen so far, either yesterday or today. I don't know if you can still see my screen. But yeah, you should be able to let's go back and see, review what we've seen in these last couple of days. So we've defined what CRUD operations are. That's basically the main objective of our lessons yesterday and today. We want to be able to create, read, update, and delete stuff. We've mainly seen how to create, read, and update, even though delete is a form of update as well. We've touched quickly upon what that means in the context of a server, even though we won't be using a server right now at this stage of the curriculum. But technically, these translate into the HTTP methods that Mr. Safedi already explained to you. So you'd have post methods, put methods, get method, delete method for create, update, read, and delete, respectively. On the other side, the server will be handling validation as well. We've seen today client-side validation, but you should be having server-side validation as well, because like I explained, since JavaScript and HTML is client-side, nothing is stopping our users from tampering with the HTML and JavaScript, forcing our client-side validation to shut down. And that's basically also why one of the reasons why encrypting from the client side doesn't make necessarily much sense, because it is running on the user's browser. They can technically get in the code and delete the encryption if they want to. So we need to be able to handle things on the server side as well, where users can tamper with anything. That's basically where we'll encrypt passwords before sending them to the database. That's where we'll be doing an extra layer of data validation as well before sending it to the database. Because once it's sent to the database, then we should be sure that it's good data. We've seen how to send form data. We've seen what form data is, how to create a new form in HTML, but also how to generate a new form in JavaScript. We've seen how to append new values of new key value pairs into our form data without having to add inputs to our HTML, which is really useful, but we didn't use today, but we definitely went through yesterday. We explained how form data is encoded to an URL when it's being sent as a GET method. We saw how we can encode and decode URL encoded form data. We've seen it with, for example, in the data.js and data.html, where we decode the data, but also we encoded data later on when we used JSON and wanted to encode it in our URL. We had, of course, a coding session and form data, and we saw JSONs, why it's good to use them, what do they offer more than form data, which were made evident today as well when we used checkboxes. I don't know if you remember checkboxes, but we had an issue when we wanted multiple checkboxes selected. We had to put them in different data pairs with another key. They couldn't share the same key. Like here, for example, we have an array of objects. We can't have, or an array. We can't have an array in form data, but it's something that is definitely possible in JSON. And if we were using JSON, the checkboxes, for example, for sports, video games, etc., could have been an array instead of being in separate key values. We discussed what MIME types are. Please stop me if at any point during the review you remember any question or something that wasn't clear for you. Don't hesitate to stop me at any time. We're just going to glance through it quickly to see if you remember anything that you want me to explain further. We saw MIME types, which are basically media types, which will be useful, especially for those who go into the web specialization, because someone asked earlier the session about post. Yes, please, Abu Bakr. HTML to element. Yes. About that function that we wrote earlier. Yes. You want me to why you choose template? Yes. So why I choose template? It's easy. Let's go back to that. If we go back here, let's go back. I hope you see my screen correctly. Why did we choose template here? It's quite simple. What we could have done, like I said, it's like we could have done simply instead of using HTML element and using template, we could have created the element with div and added the class. What I wanted to show you is the template. Why? Because template allows us to basically put whatever we want in the inner HTML and get the first child. If we used, instead of template, if you use div here, for example, that would have been a problem because div is not created for that, and it's not optimized, and the browser would have created an HTML div element. If we seen in the console, the type would have been first child is this. First child is basically what we're creating when you do the template here is we have basically, let's go to HTML. What that will create is what will create template, and then it will put our text inside, which is going to be like this. That's what we wrote, right? What we did will create this. This is what it will create. It's maybe easier to explain like this. So that's what it will create, since we're taking the HTML that we sent here, the div class grid, and inject it in the template. What it will do is this. First child simply means, if we had this like this, first child is the first element that is a child of our element. So template here has 3 children. Child number 1, number 2, and number 3. First child is simply taking the first one. That's it. We call children any element that is under parent element, like it is here. To answer your question about div, and why we use template instead of div. Like you say here, the template element is used to declare fragments of HTML that can be cloned and inserted in the document by script. This is way more optimized for the browser when it's trying to get fragments of HTML. If we could have used div instead of template, actually it would have worked anyway. It could have worked. It would have worked, not could have. It would have worked, Abu Bakr. But the template is made for it. There is a number of more complex optimizations going into it, and I encourage you to read it, to read through it. You'll see in the references here in our presentation. I included, not this presentation, excuse me. In this presentation, I included a link to the official documentation of the template element. I encourage you to read through it to better understand why it's useful, and it touches a bit complex subjects like document fragments. That's why I don't want to go too much into detail, because the subject can get pretty complex in terms of DOM manipulation, and I don't think you need to go that deep. And I think that will maybe confuse you guys more than it will help. Just know that template is there to optimize and stop certain errors from happening. So a template is a better option when we want to have DOM manipulation and fragments of HTML that we want to display in the DOM. That's it. So let's continue through our review. Let's review quickly what we did today. Today, we went through how to validate our forms. Yesterday, we written forms with a data bound one way and two ways. Mohd, I hope as well. Actually, I would be happy to come visit you guys at some point. Yeah, I hope too. But please, at that time when I come, please teach me how to be better at Arabic and have less of a robotic voice. على خاطر لأن نسيت اسم الشكون، ولكن واحد فيكم قال لي أن صوتي كرجل الآلي لما أتكلم بالعربية.
You can watch Captain Majin to learn some Arabic.
So yeah, I understand. I just don't use it at all. That's why.
Miho said that your language like a robot.
Well, thank you for the feedback. I swear.
Fantastic, by the way.
I learned Arabic in school for many years, and we learn actually in Tunisia. We learn Arabic since first day in school, and I learned it for so many years. But once I got out of school, I just never used it anymore. I haven't had an opportunity to use it anymore. That's why I'm a bit rusty. And I work like a robot because I need to stop every time and try to remember how things are said and what the differences with Tunisian is. Because if I talk in Tunisians, you won't understand me. Hey, نتكلموا بالتونسي. برشا
I want them to speak any language. Yes, we just kidding, and we have to learn from you and from your expertise. We didn't. يعني اللغة ليست مشكلة في التعامل يعني مع الخبراء.
يعيشك. Thank you. Thank you. But yes, I could just. That's one point. I know sometimes it may be interested trying to mix English with Arabic, but please know that I understand you when you talk in Arabic. The issue is maybe when I talk, because I need to stop every time to try to remember words due to a lack of practice. In Tunisia, we don't really use. I can talk in Tunisian though. كان نتكلم بالتونسي كما تو نتكلم ما يظهرليش برشا فيكم باش يفهموني، على خاطر التونسي فيه فرق كبير بين تونسي وبين العربية. تونسي مش كيف. So yeah. Thank you for your feedback. I hope I'm doing well, and hope I'm interesting to you guys and getting you into JavaScript, because it's really fun. Please have fun with it. It's really good to learn this, and really, please, I want you to be interested in this. It's the best way to improve. Thank you, Yasmin. That's very touching. So I mean, the time is up and we still haven't reviewed much, but I think today's lesson is still pretty fresh in your minds anyway. Keep in mind, I'll still, like yesterday, I'll keep my Discord and WhatsApp open. So please, when you're taking the time to review it on your own, don't hesitate to ask me questions. The English language is a bit of an obstacle to understanding some things. I get that, Mujahid, even though we established that my Arabic may be harder to understand than English. But please ask me in Arabic if it is a bit of an obstacle, and I will do my best to answer it in Arabic as clear as I can.
Okay.
Don't hesitate to stop me.
معلش رح احكي بالعربي بس هيك كثير منيح يعني عشان يكون تفاعل عشان حتى اذا في عندكم اي اسئله ومش قادرين تعبروا عليها بالانجلش فهي اخذت البرميشن من حازم انه تسالوا بالعربي حتى لو يعني فما تخلوا اللغه انه يعني عائق انه انتم تسالوا وتتناقشوا وتكونوا انفولد بشكل او باخر بالسيشن.
نعم. Don't hesitate. I really understand. Like Ssl just talking, I really understand Arabic. It's just talking. I'll do my best to explain in Arabic when it's needed as well. Even though you need to bear with my robotic voice, but I'll do my best to explain it in Arabic when English isn't doing it for you guys. But please, like I said, don't let it be an obstacle. Don't let anything be an obstacle in this journey you're going through to acquiring better skills. You have this opportunity to get better, and please use it. Don't let anything be an obstacle. I promise any feedback you have, I'll do my best to get rid of any obstacle you might have. And let's move forward together. And I promise you, no matter the feedback, you can have negative feedback as well. I won't be sad. I won't be angry. I won't be anything. I just need you guys to learn and reach your objectives. That's all I need from this process. So please don't hesitate. Never. Okay, Mohammed. Stop me next time. Well, I think we can conclude here, Ssl. But like I said, I will be available on the Discord server. If later on you're reviewing and something is not clear, I may be able to answer you there, or the WhatsApp. It's I don't. My planning is free for the rest of the day, so I will probably be able to answer you if need be.
Amazing. Thanks for your time, Hazem. It's very appreciated. That's very appreciated.
Thank you guys for your time as well. Thank you for paying attention to the course. And I hope you had fun and that you learned new things. Have a great day.
Bye bye. Bye bye all.
Bye.